Hello, everyone of IB History of the Americas 1. This is Mr. Chitwood, and this is going to be our first video lecture of the year. This lecture is primarily going to consist of concepts of history, big ideas that I want you guys to kind of keep in mind as we're going through each unit, as you guys are digging into your own individual research, and also in terms of just trying to understand a way to categorize events, dates, and places. Let's talk about the focus questions for this lecture. I want you guys to keep in mind over the next 10 to 15 minutes this first question right here. What does it mean to study history? We're going to talk about this term called historiography and what that has to do with what we're going to do in this class, and also how can we apply historical concepts in our everyday lives. The last question I want you guys to keep an eye out for is, what role does history play in society? So, historiography is commonly defined as the writing of history, especially the writing of history based on the critical examination of sources, the selection of particular details from the authentic materials in those sources, and the synthesis of those details into a narrative that stands the test of critical examination. The term historiography also refers to the theory and history of historical writing. So when I talk about historiography, I am not necessarily talking about the what in terms of what happened. I am talking about the writing of what happened. So a lot of this class, especially as you guys have seen so far, has been primarily looking at certain ideas of history, big concepts through the lens of a couple case authors. It's not going to go away, and it's continuing to be a common thing that we're going to be looking for and looking at throughout this course. There's a couple different types of history that I want you guys to be aware of. The first is narrative history. The narrative history deals with the whole societies, an entire nation, or in diplomatic history, groups of nations over a long period of time. Typically, narrative history is done over a course of many volumes, or you'll see it in probably like a textbook. Your textbook specifically is a pretty good, darn good example. But when we look at monographic history, and these are the types of texts that I'm going to ask that you guys really try to incorporate into your research paper, these specific texts start to become a little bit more technical, a little bit more specialized analysis of particular events or problems of the past, and it becomes to be a little bit more of a problem-solving text. Oftentimes within a monograph, you will have a very specific title, and in addition to that, it's going to look to be more along the lines of some sort of problem-solving aspect. So we'll talk a little bit more about what monographs are, especially when we get into the bulk work of our research paper. Why should we study history? Well, oftentimes, as you guys have heard me say in the past, history can be subjective. It does not always have the same interpretation. In addition, we have a ton of different evidence. Historians have a ton of different evidence that they have to consider as being either credible or not credible, trustworthy, not trustworthy, when trying to understand and incorporate that into their own writing and retelling of the story. We also have to be aware of bad history and any bias that might come in that might limit our understanding of the whole story. We also need to be aware of different interpretations. History allows us to accept the complexity while still finding an acceptable, logical, and well-researched conclusion. You primarily, especially in this class, are going to be concerned with interpreting historical sources to the best of your ability to comprehend and understand what exactly it is that happened in whatever time period we're talking about. A lot of this course is comparative in nature, yes, but what we are going to be comparing the most of is corroboration of our sources to try to come to our own conclusions about what is happening. So you, in a sense, are taking the role of a historian or a researcher. Let's take a look at these 6 key concepts of history. And these key concepts all kind of work in tandem with each other. They are not mutually exclusive. Up at the top, we have change. Then change blends into continuity, and then into causation, consequence, significance, and perspective. And we're going to have a discussion about all 6 of those right now. Change. Oftentimes throughout the study of history, it involves investigation of the extent to which people and events bring about change. Discussion of concepts of change can encourage sophisticated discussion. So think about and look for change where some may argue that none exists, or use evidence to challenge orthodox theories and assumptions about people and events that is claimed to have led to significant changes. Continuity, and when I talk about continuity, I'm talking about the more things change, the more things stay the same. Throughout history, there is significant continuity. Oftentimes, you'll hear that common phrase in history is that it's bound to repeat itself. While that is true, I like to say that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it definitely does rhyme. Through the understanding of continuity, it shows awareness that there are times where there has been considerable continuity in the midst of great historical change. When we're talking about causation is something that effective historical thinkers recognize, that many claims made about the past seek to more thoroughly explain and understand how a certain set of circumstances originated. And it also allows us for a deep historical understanding that is demonstrated when people recognize that most historical events are caused by an interplay and diverse and multiple causes. Consequence. As you can see here, I am trying to include as many terrible memes as possible. For some reason, this was so terrible last night when I was creating this presentation that I literally laughed out loud. But consequence, especially in history, is the understanding of how forces in the past have shaped future people and societies. When interpreting consequence, you should use evidence and interpretations of those people and events to make comparisons between different points in time. Let's talk a little bit about significance. History is not simply the record of all events that have happened. It is the record that has been preserved through evidence or traces of the past and or aspects that someone has consciously decided to record and communicate. How do we do this? We ask questions about why something may have been recorded or included. What are the values of this? What is the purpose of this text or this event? All ideas to keep in mind when addressing the significance. And perspectives. Perspectives, as a historian, we should be aware of how history is sometimes used or abused to retell and promote a grand narrative of history, a narrowly focused national mythology that ignores other perspectives, or to elevate a single perspective to a position of predominance. All right, what I would like you guys to do is to pause this video after I'm done talking here in just 1 second, and to reflect on these key concepts within your notes. I want you to think about an event in your life, and I want you to try to apply at least 4 of these 6 concepts and explain how each concept applies to your event. So go ahead and hit that pause button on your notes, take a break for a second, reflect, write down maybe either mind map it, like you have it over here, or you could hash it out in 2 full sentence paragraphs. Just kind of identify the key concepts of history and try to apply them to an event in your life. So go ahead and pause this video right now and begin it when you are done. All right, so let's briefly talk about the past. The past, in terms of this diagram here, this bigger outer circle, just let's imagine that this bigger outer circle represents all action and thoughts by all individuals at all times and places, and that these other inner circles help us to understand something a little bit different. Right up at the top, we have this kind of inner circle being events that are observed but are lost due to not being recorded. Right here we have events being observed and remembered and recorded. But in this next section we have, in terms of historical understanding, that these unrecorded thoughts and actions are also lost as we start to kind of dwindle down the available resources. And then in this second to last circle, we have events which we have surviving records. This is that raw material of history in which we have those surviving records still to this day. And it is important for a historian to understand that in the grand scheme, this bigger circle that is the past, that is all actions and thoughts by all individuals at all times and places, that this tiny little circle is representative of available, usable, and believable records for a given historical account. So when we're doing our own research or we're looking into a certain case study and we only have a few sources limited, one, we should come with an understanding that this might represent some of the sources that are there, but also that we are still fairly limited despite the interconnectivity that we have with things like the internet and these databases and archives that are usable and credible resources. Are still fairly limited to us, and we need to have an understanding that within all these other circles, it definitely is some and much of history that is and is not recorded and preserved still to this day. And I want to leave us kind of towards the end of this lecture with this following quote that I think we should kind of heed as we go through this course in terms of trying to understand the concepts of history and how we retell it. The historian, Solution says in 120 of the Common Era, that historians should be fearless and incorruptible, a man of independence, loving frankness and truth, one who, as the poet says, calls a fig and a spade. He should yield to neither hatred nor affection, not should be unsparing and unpitying. He should be neither shy nor deprecating, but an impartial judge, giving each side all it deserves, but no more. He should know in his writing no country and no city. He should bow to no authority and acknowledge no king. He should never consider what this or that man will think, but should state the facts as they really occurred. With that, our Concepts in History first video lecture is concluded. You will be asked to complete a Microsoft form towards the end of class, and I ask that you guys kind of do a little bit of reflecting on what we kind of talked about in this brief lecture, and also try to come to some conclusions of those focus questions at the very beginning.